Picture this, a world of poetry that's all about strict, rigid rules. Every single line has to be the same length, the structure is always predictable. But then, something totally new pops up in China, something born from music, from entertainment. It's a kind of poetry that just smashes all those rules and opens up a whole new way to talk about what it means to be human. This is the story of song lyric poetry. And look, this wasn't just some small change, it was a total game changer. A brand new kind of poetry shows up, and it seems like it was designed to break the rules. The most obvious thing about it, it had long lines and short lines all mixed together, which was just unheard of in serious poetry back then. And it didn't come from a quiet scholar's study, no, it was born from a song.
All right, so let's put a name to this new poetic voice and really get into what made it so completely different.
So what do we call it? Song lyric poetry. And really, the definition is right there in the name. It's a kind of poetry that comes directly from music. The poets weren't just making up words. They were essentially filling in the lyrics to a tune that already existed. That tune was the boss. It dictated everything, which is exactly why the lines are different lengths. They had to be, to match the notes and the rhythm of the music. This chart lays it out perfectly. On the one hand, you've got traditional poetry, all even lines, neat little couplets, and the theme is what shapes the poem. But on the other hand, you have song lyric poetry, uneven lines, more complex stanzas, and the melody is king. The tune itself built the entire structure of the poem. So a pretty natural question is, where did this music even come from? Let's dig into its origins and see how this whole thing got started. Okay, so the story really kicks off during the Tang Dynasty. New, really exciting music starts flowing in from Central Asia, and it becomes a huge hit at court. That was the seed. A bit later, during the Five Dynasties period, the genre was popular enough that someone compiled the very first major collection of these poems. But it was really during the Song Dynasty that it just exploded and became a true, respected art form. Now, this is fascinating. The genre had this very feminine connection at the start. The banquet music it came from was mostly sung by highly skilled female entertainers or courtesans. So naturally, the early poems were all about themes like love, longing, and heartbreak. And because of that connection, the serious literary scholars of the day kind of looked down on it, questioning if it could ever be serious art. So at first, the genre really took off in a very short, very concise form. And its first true master was, well, a pretty unlikely person. And just to give you an idea of how short we're talking, a typical poem had fewer than 58 characters. Think about that. You have to capture an entire mood, an entire scene, in fewer characters than a tweet. That's some serious precision. The person who took this short form and made it truly great was a man named Li Yu. He was actually the last king of a small kingdom, and he was captured and spent the rest of his life as a prisoner. And in that captivity, he turned to this poetic form, not to write about some fleeting romance, but to pour out this incredibly deep, personal grief for his lost kingdom, his lost life. You can feel the shift in his work immediately. Without a word, alone I climb the West Pavilion. The moon is like a hook. See how there's no fancy language? It's so direct, so internal. He's not just describing a scene, he's pulling you right into his silent, lonely world. He was a genius at using real, physical images to describe these huge, abstract emotions. I mean, how do you describe grief? He writes, "Cut, it doesn't break. Tidied, a mess again. This separation grief." It's just a brilliant metaphor for that feeling of sorrow you just can't get rid of, no matter what you do. So, thanks to innovators like Li Yu, the genre started to get some real respect. And with that respect came ambition. The form itself started to grow. And, I mean, it really grew. The new long song lyric could be anywhere from 70 to over 200 characters long. This wasn't just about making the poems longer. It was like moving from a small sketchbook to a giant canvas. It allowed for so much more complexity. This little table sums up the evolution perfectly. The short lyric was simple. It was all about powerful images. But the long lyric, which was really perfected by poets like Lu Yong and Su Shi, could tell complex stories. The language was more continuous, more descriptive. It could just do things the short form never could.
So how did it grow? Well, two guys were absolutely key. First, there was Lu Yong. He really understood the music, and he introduced these little things called leading words, phrases like "I recall" or "gradually," that acted like signposts, guiding the poem's flow and allowing for really complex storytelling. Then, the legendary Su Shi came along, took that structure and just blew the doors off the old themes. He used it to explore philosophy, history, and heroic feelings, stuff that used to be only for traditional poetry.
So, with this new, expanded, mature form, poets could finally express the entire range of human experience, from the deepest, darkest sorrow to the most incredible heroism.
Yeah, this was no longer the little genre of love songs from the entertainment quarters. In its fully developed form, song lyric poetry became one of the most powerful and flexible ways to write about, well, anything and everything. Take Li Qingzhao, who is one of the most celebrated female poets in all of Chinese history. She was an absolute master of this form, and she used its musical qualities and its structure to explore a kind of personal sorrow that feels just overwhelming. Just listen to the sound of these opening lines from one of her poems. Searching and searching, seeking and seeking, chilly and cold, quiet and desolate, sad, sorrowful, miserable. That repetition is totally on purpose. She's using the very sound of the words to build this crushing atmosphere of grief and hopelessness. Her poetry could also be incredibly direct, almost brutally so. It could capture this raw feeling of dread. All alone, what am I going to do before it gets dark? That line isn't just about being lonely, it's about a real fear of the darkness coming. And now for a complete 180. Using the exact same poetic form, the soldier statesman Sing Ji expressed a totally different kind of spirit. This was a man of action, and his poetry is just packed with this bold, confident, heroic energy. You can just feel the confidence dripping from his lines. He writes, "I see in green mountains such alluring charm. I expect that they see the same in me." That's not just a guy who likes nature. That's a bold declaration of self-worth. He sees himself as an equal to this grand, majestic landscape. And it all leads to this final, powerful line that just perfectly captures the huge, larger-than-life personality this genre can now contain. Instead of saying, "Oh, I wish I could have met the great poets of the past," Zinkiji flips it completely. He says, "I regret that the ancients had no chance to see my wildness." It's just this defiant, unforgettable statement on the power of a poetic voice that began as a simple song and grew to hold entire worlds.